Welcome to Vue Mastery's Intro to Vue 3 course. We're going to take a journey through the Vue universe to explore the technology and build a solid foundation of Vue skills so we can build upon that to head towards Vue Mastery. This course is your first step along the way, and on our platform we have a whole library of courses you can take. Now let's take a look at the app we're going to be building throughout this course. As you can see, we're going to be building a product page. When we click the Add to Cart button, we can add the product to our cart. And when we hover our mouse over these colors, we can change the image. And you'll see one of our products is out of stock, and we're disabling the button so we can't add that one to the cart. If we scroll down here, you'll see we have a form where we can add reviews. So we'll learn the basics of building forms with Vue, and by the end of the course, we'll understand the fundamentals of how to build a Vue app. To get the most out of this course, you're going to want to be coding along. You're going to want to head over to our repo, clone the project, and then from there you can switch between different branches for the starting and ending code for each lesson. For example, in the next lesson, lesson 2, you can check out L2-start or L2-end for the starting and ending code respectively. Throughout this course, you're going to see me using VS Code, and I do recommend that for Vue development, but if you already have a code editor of your choice, you can stick with that one. But if you want to use VS Code and you don't already have it, you're going to want to download that now and also install an extension, ES6 string HTML. You'll see why this extension will be useful in later lessons. And finally, at the end of each lesson, you'll see a coding challenge so you can put the concepts into practice. Now, if you're ready, let's create our first Vue app in the next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to look at the starting code and learn how to create a Vue app. To take a tour of the starting code, you'll see we have an assets directory. Inside of there is a directory for our images. We've got one for blue socks and green socks. Then we've got a CSS file for all of our styles. Inside of the index.html, we're importing those styles. And below that, we are importing Vue. Importing the Vue library this way is the simplest possible way to start using Vue. You'll notice at the time of this recording, I'm using the Vue 3 beta CDN link. But if you're watching this and Vue 3 is already out, you're going to want to go to the official Vue.js documentation, click on the Quick Start tab, and then scroll down and copy this CDN link for prototyping and learning purposes. This gives you helpful warnings and error messages during development. So you can just copy that latest CDN link and replace it in this script tag. At the bottom of the file, you'll see we're importing our main.js file. So let's take a look at that. So far, it's very simple. It's just a constant called product equals socks. You'll notice that in the template, we've got this h1 here, and it says product goes here. So the question now is, how do we display product using Vue? Well, first we're going to have to create a Vue app, so let's get that started. In our main.js, we'll delete this out and create a constant called app, and we'll say Vue, which we have access to because we installed it via that script tag, .createApp, and this will do exactly what it says. It's going to create our Vue app. As an argument, we're going to pass in an object and add a data property. This is going to be a function which returns another object where we'll store our data. So here we'll add that product back in now as a data item. To simplify this syntax, I'm going to switch this out with the ES6 shorthand. Now that we've created our app, I'm going to change this comment to say import app, because we're not just importing some JavaScript, we're now importing an entire Vue app. And I'm going to make another comment below here that says mount app and add a script tag so that we can mount the app that we just created into our DOM. So I'll create a constant called mounted app and set that equal to app. That refers to the app that we just imported, and then .mount. Inside of the mount method, we'll add an argument. which is a DOM selector used to plug the app into a piece of our DOM, such as this div with the ID of app. Now here in the H1, we'll switch this out for this double curly brace syntax, inside of which we'll say product, referring to product in our data. Now that we've created our Vue app and plugged it into the DOM, we should be seeing socks appear when we render this page. Checking it out in the browser, looks like it's working. Awesome. But how exactly is this working? Let's take a look. When we created our Vue app, we said const app equals vue.createApp. Then we passed in the options object. This allows us to add some optional properties in order to configure our application. And even though it's called the options object, it is not optional. So you're always going to have to pass in at least an empty object to get it started. Doing this creates our Vue instance, which is the heart of our Vue application, which powers everything. On that options object, we added our data option, which returned an object full of our data. As of now, it's just product whose value is socks. We then imported our app into our HTML file and then mounted it into the DOM, which effectively plugged our app into that div with the ID of app. Now at this point, that div and everything within it has access to our Vue app. So if you're wondering what's happening with this double curly brace syntax, you can imagine it like a phone, which has access to a phone within our Vue app. And we're able to ask the app, hey, what's the value of product? And the app responds, socks. So when the page renders, we see socks display on the page. If this double curly brace syntax or mustache syntax is new to you, it allows us to write JavaScript expressions. In other words, it allows us to run valid JavaScript within our HTML. So we could be doing things like concatenating strings, running conditional logic with a ternary operator, running methods on our data, and so on. So back in the diagram, if we were to change socks to boots, our expression would receive that new value and our DOM would update. But how exactly is that happening? Well, the answer is that Vue is reactive. Underneath the hood, Vue has an entire reactivity system that handles updating. So when a data value changes, anywhere relying on that data value is going to automatically update for us. We don't have to do anything to make that happen. As a side note, here on Vue Mastery, we have an entire Vue 3 reactivity course. So if you're interested in exploring the reactivity system under the hood, you can take that advanced course later. If we were using product in multiple places within our template, and product were to update, every place that was using that value is going to update. Again, this is all thanks to Vue's reactivity system. By popping open the DevTools, we can see reactivity happening live in the browser. If I say mounted app, then product, which is that data value, I can update it to shoes, and when I hit enter, our DOM is going to update automatically. I'll do the same for sandals, hit enter, and there it goes, updating reactively. And that brings us to the end of the lesson and to our first coding challenge. Now, you'll want to add a product description to the data object, then display that description using an expression within a p tag. You'll find a link to the challenge's solution code below this video. As a reminder, if you're coding along with our repo, you can check out the ending code as well. So for this one, it would be L2-end. In this lesson, we're going to look at the concept of attribute binding. Let's get started. If you're coding along with this repo, you can open up your terminal and say git checkout L3-start. This is going to pull up the starting code for this lesson. You'll see we now have more divs within our template, And in this lesson, we're going to be focusing on this div with the class of product image. Inside here, you see this comment that says image goes here. So we're going to look at using attribute binding to display an image here. Once we get this to work, we're going to be displaying the image right here within our app. Remember that in our assets directory, we have this folder with these images. So in order to target one of those images, we're going to add a new data property to our Vue app. We'll say image and set that equal to a path. /assets/images/socks._green.jpg. Now we're ready to add an image element here. In the source attribute, we'll say image, and we want to be pulling in the path from our image data, much like we pulled in the product data in the H1 below using that expression. So the question here is, how do we bind the attribute src to image? To do that, we're going to say v-bind and then colon. This is the vbind directive. Now we've created a bond between what lives in this attribute and the data itself. So now looking in the browser, we see our image displaying. So let's understand how vbind works. We use vbind to dynamically bind an attribute to an expression. In this case, the attribute is src, and the expression is here in the quotes. So we've created this bond between the attribute and the value of the expression. If you're thinking to yourself, this doesn't look like a JavaScript expression, you can imagine it looking like this. Because underneath the hood, Vue is going to evaluate this just the same. So when we say image here, Vue knows that we're referring to image in our data. And when our app renders, the expression essentially asks the Vue app, what is the value of image? It evaluates to that image path, allowing us to pull in and display that image. And because of Vue's reactivity system, if we updated this to the blue image, the expression that our source attribute is bound to would update, and our browser would display the new image. Using vbind to bind to attributes like this is super common. So common that there is a shorthand for vbind, and it's just the colon, like so. And as you can imagine, since there's so many different HTML attributes, there's a lot of use cases for vbind. For example, you might be binding a description to an alt attribute, binding a URL to an href, binding some dynamic styles to a class or style attribute, disabling a button with vbind, and so on. So now we've reached the end of the lesson and on to our second challenge. Add a URL to the data object, then use vbind to bind that URL to an anchor tag's href attribute. As a reminder, if you're coding along with our repo, you can check out the ending code as well. So for this one, it would be L3-end. In this lesson, we're going to look at conditional rendering. Specifically, we're going to want to be displaying in stock or out of stock depending upon a condition, whether this product is in stock or not. If you're coding along, you can check out to this branch, which is L4-start. So in our code, we're going to add a p tag that says in stock, and another that says out of stock. Again, we only want one of these to show up depending on if our product is in stock or not. So we'll head into our data and add a new in stock property, which is going to be a Boolean. We only want one of these to show up depending on if our product is in stock or not. So we'll head into our data object and add a new in stock property, which which is going to be a Boolean. We'll initialize that to true. Over on the p tag, we're going to use a new directive, the vif directive. So we'll say vif equals instock, and on the second p tag, we're going to say velse. This is probably pretty self-explanatory, but here we're saying if instock is true, show the first p tag, otherwise, or velse, show the second p tag. And because instock is currently true, we're going to show the first one. So looking at this in the browser, we're displaying instock. Great. And to make sure this is working, we'll change instock to false, which should cause our second p tag to display. And there it is, just as expected. It's worth noting here that you don't always need to pair a vif with a velse. If you have just one element that you want to be displaying or not, you can just say vif on that element. You don't need a fallback element with velse beneath it. So here, if our instock data value is true, we're going to be displaying that p tag. Another way to accomplish this same behavior is to use vshow. This is used for toggling an element's visibility. Instead of adding and removing the element from the DOM like vif does, vshow simply toggles the element's visibility. So as you can imagine, this is the more performant option if you have something that's toggling off and on the screen often, like a modal, for example. So since instock is true, our element is visible. But let's look at what happens when instock is false in this case. In the DevTools, I've highlighted the p tag, and pay attention to what happens when I refresh. See how now we have this inline style, display none. So really the element hasn't gone anywhere. It was just hidden with that style that vshow added to it. So we just looked at the differences between vif and vshow. Earlier we looked at vif with velse. Now let's take a look at how we can add additional layers of conditional logic. To do this, I'm going to change instock to inventory, and instead of a Boolean, let's make it an integer and set it to 100. Now we can say if inventory is greater than 10, show instock. And just to make sure this is working, we are indeed showing instock, so far so good. Now I want to show you how we can add those additional layers of logic in between here. So if I add a new p tag that says almost sold out, I can add the directive velse if, and in this expression, I'll say if inventory is less than or equal to 10 and inventory is greater than 0, in that condition, we want to display almost sold out. Otherwise, if inventory is 0, show out of stock. To demo this, I'll put 8, which is less than 10 and greater than 0. And in the browser, when I refresh, we'll see almost sold out. And of course, if inventory is 0, we'll default to the final level of velse and display out of stock. Perfect. To make this conditional logic a little more concrete, I like to envision it like this, where we've got this ball that stops at the level that evaluates to true. So if inventory is 100, that's greater than 10, so we stop at the first level. But as soon as inventory turns to something less than or equal to 10 and greater than 0, such as 8, we stop at the middle level. And finally, when inventory is 0, our ball of truth falls down to the final level. So that brings us to the end of this concept and to our coding challenge. Add an on-sale Boolean to the data object, then use that to conditionally render a p tag that says on sale whenever on sale is true. And a reminder, if you want to check out the ending code for this lesson, you'll want to go to L4-end. See you in the next lesson.